I've got a couple of comments. The first is I heard that one of the things that boosted the popularity of LaTeX was that you could create your own packages or style files for it. So it wasn't, this system does everything you want, use it. It was, well, this system is useful and you can add to it. Is that a fair statement of the situation, do you think, Nelson?
Oh, absolutely, because Scribe had a very limited number of document styles, but they were all programmed into the software. It wasn't an extensible system. So people were happy to get a document formatting system where they could describe what things were, not what they looked like. That is to say, this is a section, a paragraph, a figure, a table, instead of picking fonts and margins and so on like one does in word processors. But it really couldn't have gone further than it was, because you would have to rely on the vendor to produce any new features you wanted. And the beauty of LaTeX was that Leslie said the document style or later document class command is where things are decided as to how they are going to look. But the author's description of those features is going to be the same no matter what the document style is. And I think that was a very important decision, to separate markup from appearance.
I think this is relevant too, which is that both Don Knuth and Leslie, and I think Brian, had a class of documents in mind when they were developing their system. It wasn't, we're going to write a system that's going to do everything, but I'm a young man in a hurry, or I'm a middle-aged person who's got other things to do, or whatever. And I'm going to study this class of documents and make sure that my system will deal with this class of documents. Is that a fair statement or not?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's clear, since all three of them came from the computer science and mathematics world, they had very definite views that these systems ought to be able to produce and display mathematics easily. But they didn't really look at other kinds of documents, such as magazines and newspapers. Newspapers are produced under tremendous time constraints. You have just a few hours before you go to press. And magazines are full of photographs and images cutting into paragraphs of text so that you have very strange margins. And you always have multiple columns, and multiple columns in tech have not been easy to deal with. And they still do pose a substantial problem in typesetting. And it's not clear to me, even though a lot of work has been done to produce multi-column styles, to make a package in LaTeX that would allow you to produce something like a typical commercial magazine, I think would be quite difficult, and perhaps not even possible.
So Don and Leslie and Brian had typesetting mathematics in mind, and I'm sure that Don must have had typesetting tables in mind, because tables are so important in the stuff, sort of information he's presenting. And I guess they didn't have the typesetting of music in mind. Newspapers have multiple authors, many authors. As you say, there are time constraints. And they also have people that actually buy space, advertisers. And they have to deal with advertising, they have to deal with the placement of advertising, the billing of advertising, and all sorts of stuff. So I remember the stop press used to be a stop press. The press would be stopped and a slug would be added, and there'd be a blank column on the back page for stop press news. And the press would be stopped, this extra piece of information would be put in, and that would be part of the stop press. I also discovered where the term boilerplate came from. I thought it had something to do with boilers, thick, heavy metal. No, it's something like this. The Associated Press, amongst other things, would supply news stories along with advertisements, and they would supply them as, roughly speaking, type ready to go. You had this system where you'd typeset it using metal, and then you'd take a paper mache cast of it and curve the paper mache and cast again from the paper mache so that you get something that you could run on a cylinder. The steam press were rotary, they had cylinders, and so you had this problem of converting the flat type that's been set in some way into a rotary type. So anyway, the stuff that arrived from Associated Press for newspapers to use was sort of all preformed to fit into the production system. And because it looked a bit like a boiler, it was called boilerplate. So in programming, we've got boilerplate, which is sort of the routine code that we have to put in. And I was surprised to read that that was the origin of the term. So that's that. I'll stop now. We can edit out. Sorry, off you go now.
Perhaps just also comment that until Don Knuth came along, really document formatting systems that had been developed that were to run on computers, which would really mean in the 60s and 70s, they really did not address the issue of mathematics. There were typesetting systems used by commercial publishers that were private, secret, licensed, expensive, and had professional people doing the typesetting that did mathematics, but it was never believed, I think at the time, that mathematical typesetting ought to be in the hands of the author. In fact, early manuscripts that I sent off were done on a typewriter with handwritten equations, and you just hope that the typography staff at the publisher got the conversion correct, which meant you got galley proofs back, and then you would have to go through those and verify that they typeset everything correctly. And of course, usually they hadn't, and there would be often multiple rounds of galley proofs before your article was ready for printing. And fortunately, we've been able to eliminate most of that today.